Welcome to 7th grade math. The student-teacher ratio of a school compares the total number of students to the total number of teachers. So we have two schools with different amounts for students and teachers. Write the student-teacher ratio for Prairie Lake Middle School as a fraction. So it's student-teacher. So we're going to have students 396 over teachers of 22 because it's students to teachers. Write this fraction with the denominator of 1. To do this, find out if 22 goes into 396 evenly by dividing 396 by 22. And if we do that, we get 18 over 1, or 18 to 1. So we have 18 teachers. We have 18 students to 1 teacher. Can you determine which school has the lowest student-teacher ratio by examining just the number of teachers at each school? How about just the number of students at each school? No, you need both the number of teachers and students to determine the student-teacher ratio for each school. What school has a lower student-teacher ratio? Well, we know one school is 18 to 1. And so now we need to find out the student-teacher ratio for Greenbrier Middle School. So 510 divided by 30 and 30 divided by 30 because we're trying to get 1 in the denominator. So 510 divided by 30 is 17. So Greenbrier Middle School has a 17 to 1 student to teacher ratio. So Greenbrier Middle School has the lower student teacher ratio of the two schools. Ratios. In words, we say a ratio is a comparison between two quantities. And examples of that in numbers, 3 to 4. And we read the next one, 3 to 4. And we can read the fraction as 3 to 4. Algebra, A to B, A to B, A to B. Ratios can express part to part to whole, or whole to part relationships, and are often written as fractions in simplest form. Scaffolding question. What is the fraction 15 20ths written in simplest form? So we need to know what the greatest common factor is. That would be 5. So if we divide the numerator and the denominator by 5, we get 3/4. What is the fraction 8/12 written in simplest form? So again, we need to find the greatest common factor, which is 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. If I have 8 pennies and 12 nickels, what is my ratio of pennies to nickels? 8 pennies over 12 nickels, so 8 to 12. 8 pennies over 12 nickels. Simplify, 2 to 3. So we have 2 pennies for every 3 nickels. If my sister has 4 pennies and 6 nickels, what is her ratios of pennies to nickels? So she has 4 pennies, 6 nickels. Put it in words, 4 pennies over 6 nickels. And if we simplify, we get 2/3. Write ratios in simplest form. Seasonings are often added to meat prior to grilling. Using the recipe, write a ratio comparing the amount of garlic powder to the amount of dried oregano as a fraction in simplest form. So we have garlic powder, 4 teaspoons. We have dried oregano, 6 teaspoons. So we'll simplify. 4 and 6 divided by 2 are 2 and 3. We get 2/3. The ratio of garlic powder to dried oregano is 2/3, or 2/3, or 2 to 3. That is, for every 2 units of garlic powder, there are 3 units of dried oregano. Check your progress. Use the recipe to write each ratio as a fraction in simplest form. So pepper to garlic powder. So if we look at the recipe, pepper to garlic powder, we have 2 teaspoons of pepper and we have 4 teaspoons of garlic powder. So if we divide out by the greatest common factor, or simplify by the greatest common factor, we'll get 1/2. The ratio of pepper to garlic powder is 1/2, 1:2, or 1:2. You can write it any of those ways, unless it tells you to write it a specific way. That is, for every 1 unit of pepper, there are 2 units of garlic powder. Oregano to pepper, so we'll write it as a fraction. Oregano to pepper, 6 teaspoons oregano, 2 teaspoons of pepper. We'll simplify with the greatest common factor of 2. We get 3/1. So 3:1. The ratio of oregano to pepper is 3:1, or 3:1, or 3:1. That is, for every 3 units of oregano, there's 1 unit of pepper. Equivalent ratios are ratios that express the same relationship between 2 quantities, and equivalent ratios have the same value. Identify equivalent ratios. Determine whether the ratios 250 miles in 4 hours and 500 miles in 8 hours are equivalent. Method 1, compare the ratios written in simplest form. So we'll set up the ratios, 250 miles to 4 hours and 500 miles in 8 hours, and we'll set them as fractions. So we're saying the same thing in both of those. And divide the numerator and denominator by the greatest common factor of 2. So if we do that, we get 125/2. And if we do the same thing with 500 miles, divide the numerator and denominator by the greatest common factor of 4, you'll see that gets us a denominator of 2 in both. And we have the same ratio of 125/2. So the ratios simplify to the same fraction. If 2 ratios written as a fraction are equivalent, they can be simplified to the same fraction. So ratios greater than 1 are expressed as improper fractions and not as mixed numbers. Method 2, look for a common multiplier relating the 2 ratios. So in the previous example, or the same example, I guess, we have 250/4 and 500/8. The numerator and denominator of the ratios are related by the same multiplier of 2, meaning 250 times 2 is 500, 4 times 2 is 8. So we can see that if we multiplied both of those, we would get, if we multiplied 250/4 by 2, we would have gotten 500/8, which means they are equivalent fractions. If 2 ratios written as fractions are equivalent, multiplying the numerator and the denominator of one ratio by the same number will result in the second ratio. We've done equivalent fractions, so this should not be a new concept. Choose your method. Determine whether the ratios 20 nails for every 5 shingles and 12 nails for every 3 shingles are equivalent. Compare the ratios written in simplest form. So we have 20 nails for every 5 shingles, and we have 12 nails for every 3 shingles, and we're just going to rewrite those as fractions. And if we divide the numerator and denominator of 20/5 by the greatest common factor of 5, we will get 4/1. And if we divide the numerator and denominator of 12/3 by the greatest common factor of 3, we will get 4/1. The ratios simplify to the same fraction. So let's look for a common multiplier relating the 2 ratios. And the numerator and denominator of the ratios are related by the same multiplier, 1 2/3. So if we multiply 3 times 1 2/3, we'll get 5. And remember that we can't actually multiply by mixed numbers, so we're going to change 1 2/3 to 5/3, and then we can multiply it. Simplify and then multiply, so we get 5/1, which is 5. And then if we do the same with the numerator, 12 times 1 2/3, which as we know, we have to actually multiply 12 over 1 times 5/3. And if we simplify, we end up with 20 over 1, which equals 20. So determine whether the ratio is 2 cups of flour to every 8 cups of sugar and 8 cups of flour to every 14 cups of sugar are equivalent. Compare the ratios written in simplest form. So we have 2 cups of flour to 8 cups of sugar, and we have 8 cups of flour to 14 cups of sugar. We rewrite those as fractions. We get 2 over 8 and 8 over 14. We can divide the numerator and denominator of 2/8 by the greatest common factor of 2. So we get 1/4. And if we divide the numerator and denominator of 8/14 by the greatest common factor of 2, we get 4 over 7. And the ratios do not simplify to the same fraction, so they are not equivalent fractions. We do that by method 2. We have 2/8 and 8/14. The numerators of the ratios are related by the same multiplier 2. So we can multiply 2 times 4 is 8. And if we multiply 8 times 4, we do not get 14. So they are not equivalent. Real world example, baseball. Derek Jeter of the New York Yankees had 32 hits out of 93 times at bat. Jorge Posada had 11 hits out of 31 times at bat. Are these ratios equivalent? And justify your answer. So Derek Jeter, 32 hits out of 93 at bats, equals 32 over 93. And Jorge Posada, 11 hits out of 31 at bats, or 11 over 31. So we need to get Jorge Posada's equivalency to, we're going to multiply the denominator times 3 to get the denominator equal to Derek Jeter's. So when we do that, we get 33 over 93. So Jorge Posada has more, would have had more hits in the same number of at bats. So they're not equivalent. Swimming, a community pool requires there to be at least 3 lifeguards for every 20 swimmers. There are 60 swimmers and 9 lifeguards at the pool. Is this the correct number of lifeguards based on the above requirements? So 3 lifeguards for every 20 is a requirement. And there are 9 lifeguards for 60 swimmers right now. So if we want to try and get the 9 to 60 equivalent to the 3 to 20, or down close to see if they're equivalent, we'll divide the numerator and denominator by 3. 60 divided by 3 is 20. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So they do have the 3 lifeguards for every 20 swimmers in place. And the recommended ratio is met. Additional examples. Mr. Gale bought a basket of apples. Using the table below, write a ratio comparing the Red Delicious apples to the Granny Smith apples as a fraction in simplest form. So there are 30 Red Delicious and there are 9 Granny Smith. So we have 30 Red Delicious over 9 Granny Smith. We have 30 over 9. 30 divided by 3 is 10. 9 divided by 3 is 3. Additional examples, determine whether the ratios 12 onions to 15 potatoes and 32 onions to 40 potatoes are equivalent. So we will stack those up. We have 12 to 15 and we have 32 to 40. And if we put those as fractions, we have 12 divided by 3 and 15 divided by 3 gives us a ratio of 4 onions to 5 potatoes. And if we factor out the greatest common factor for 32 and 40, we will have 4 to 5. Pools, it is recommended that no more than 1 person be allowed into the shallow end of the outdoor public pool for every 15 square feet of surface area. If the local pool's shallow end has a surface area of 1,800 square feet, the lifeguard's correct to allow 120 people into that part of the pool. So one person for 15 feet squared, and we'll compare that to 120 people in 1,800 square feet. And if we do that, we have 1 over 15, one person over every 15 square feet. And then we have 120 over every 1,800 square feet. And we can divide both 120 and 1,800 by 120. And we get 1 to 15. So those are equivalent, and the lifeguards were correct to allow 120 people in 1,800 square feet. There's your homework tonight. Head to Google Classroom to submit it. Hope you have a great night, and I'll see you in class.